Hello everybody and welcome back to the Not Applicable Formula 1 channel. After the Monaco Grand Prix, and maybe quite controversially, I really enjoyed this weekend of racing, even though it was Monaco. So let's get straight into it and talk about my 3 winners and 3 losers from this weekend. I know that I try not to talk about Max too much when he wins because it happens so often at the moment, but I can't brush over this performance. Saturday saw one of the most nail-biting qualifying sessions that I can remember, with Max Verstappen coming out on top with 20 seconds of possibly the best driving you might ever see from him. Fernando Alonso had just put in a mega lap time in his Aston Martin car, and Max was 2/10 down going into the final sector. I think it's fair to say that Max Verstappen is at his best in the races. Like, he isn't known for qualifying in the same way that other drivers are on the grid, and we've been in this scenario before with him. It had shades of Jeddah 2021, where he needed the perfect lap, and on the penultimate corner, he put it into the barriers. But that was not the case this time around. It was wall riding excellence. Literally, he hits the wall any harder and those wheels come off, but he had it down to a science. He was so precise, and then on the Sunday, he made it look fairly easy, and for the most part, it was. The opening 40 laps just saw him stretch out a lead and make sure that Alonso was basically the only driver within a pit stop of him.
Where is everyone?
But the second half of the race threw traffic at him, where he had to try and get through groups of cars that were still battling for position whilst on incredibly worn medium tyres, which in Monaco is not easy at all. You have to be really careful whilst maintaining the pace and keep that car behind. And then if that wasn't enough, the rain came too, and he had to be incredibly patient. He didn't make any dramatic mistakes, and the team nailed the strategy, only stopping once, swapping the medium tyres that he started on for intermediate tyres, which then got him to the end of the Grand Prix. A second win for Max Verstappen in Monaco. He made it look easy when it really wasn't, and I feel like this is a huge step towards his third championship too. A truly complete performance from Verstappen.
No, I won.
And from one side of the Red Bull garage to the other, Sergio Perez, the street circuit master himself, had a nightmare weekend. Perez picked basically the worst moment possible to crash. Everyone goes on and on about how important qualifying is in Monaco, and unfortunately they're just not wrong. The track doesn't lend itself to huge performances where you can battle from the back of the pack through to the podium position. So smashing into the wall turn 1 during Q1 and guaranteeing yourself a P20 start is definitely the worst thing you can do.
I made one tiny mistake.
The one saving grace is that he's in a Red Bull car and could go for a strategy that would give him the best chance to show off the pace of that car and possibly battle his way through a little bit during the pit stops. They went rogue and pitted on lap 1, going for a 77 lap stint on the hards, and it was working. He caught the back of the pack and just needed to be patient and wait for the cars in front of him to pit, and then he'd slowly be able to make his way up the field. The problem was he wasn't patient and smashed into the back of Lance Stroll, breaking his front wing to the extent that he had to pit for a new one, so his one-stop strategy was out of the window, and so were his chances of achieving even a point in Monaco. And it only went from bad to worse when the rain came, as he decided to go in for intermediate tyres and then gamble on the full wet tyres, only for the rain to come to a stop, meaning that the full wet tyres overheated, so he had to go back onto the intermediate tyres to finish the race. Like any Grand Prix where you're pitting 5 times and using 4 different tyre compounds really isn't the best day at the office.
Hi, it's me again.
Hopes of staying in the title battle now rest with Max Verstappen making mistakes and dropping out of Grand Prix, but I just don't see that happening with how well he's known to drive once we get into the European stint and your more like traditional circuits coming up on the calendar too. Like, unfortunately for Perez fans, I can see Max putting together a little bit of a win streak similar to this time last year. Moving on to winner number 2, Esteban Ocon just doesn't waver under pressure. When he is in these high pressure situations, he seems to find a way of just delivering the goods, and he has a race like this in him. Usually when there's mixed weather conditions, it did have shades of Hungary 2021, Suzuka last year as well, and now we can add to the list Monaco 2023 because he did so well holding on to 3rd place throughout the race. He had Sainz smashing into the back of him. He had laps on slick tyres in traffic whilst it was raining. He had Lewis Hamilton pushing him all the way to the line, and he dealt with it all perfectly. We also have to mention that incredible qualifying lap. Coming into Monaco after 5 races, he was the best of the rest driver in terms of qualifying, being statistically the 9th best, but putting an Alpine comfortably ahead of a Ferrari and the Mercedes cars is incredible. Whilst we talk about Alpine, let's not forget about Gasly. I feel like we should mention his 7th place finish too, as he continues what I think we can say is a net positive start to his Alpine career. It's definitely had some ups and downs, but both Alpines grabbing points is a huge move in the right direction because, let's face it, they have been by far and away the 5th fastest car on track, and the Constructors' Championship finally reflects that once again. But for me, Ocon was the best driver on the grid, which is a little bit of a spoiler for my driver ratings video, but he has become the first non-Red Bull, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Mercedes car to finish on the podium in 2023. And we only saw one driver get a podium outside the top 3 teams last year. That was Lando Norris in Imola. Now we have 4 top teams. I think this might be the only time we see a midfield car on the podium, so let's just enjoy it while it lasts. Moving on, and Ferrari, once again in the losers category, as through a combination of driver and team errors, they throw away points and solidify their place in 4th in the Constructors. It's tricky to know where to start with Ferrari really this weekend. Let's start with Charles Leclerc, as it was his home Grand Prix, and the curse continues, as once again he missed out on a shot at a podium, or maybe even a win.
Cursed.
I feel like Leclerc was actually on for an okay Sunday as he qualified in P3, but then of course gets that 3-place penalty that was just annoying more than anything else. Charles is just dawdling in the tunnel as Lando Norris comes up behind him and has to dodge the Ferrari, but the team have to be communicating so much earlier. Leclerc needs to know that there is a car entering the tunnel behind him so he can make sure he's out of the way of it, and the driver and the team are at fault for me here, and the stewards even described it as very much a fault of Ferrari's, but unfortunately there's a lot of faults at Ferrari. Starting P6 is a completely different battle for Leclerc, and he had a fairly quiet afternoon as he was never able to impact the race in the way that he wanted to, mainly because the Ferrari again just shredded through the hard compound tyre. Those upgrades in Spain need to reduce the tyre wear that Ferrari has. Having said that, tyres don't matter too much if you're going to throw yourself into your competitors. Carlos Sainz clipping the rear end of Esteban Ocon's car exiting the tunnel, which could have ended in disaster, and we've seen it happen there before, but instead left him with a loose front wing end plate that eventually broke itself off a lap later and was run over by Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. And luckily neither of them picked up punctures too. Sainz then got very angry at the Ferrari team because of their strategy choice. He started on the hard compound tyre, but came in around the same time as Ocon and Hamilton on the mediums. Sainz wanted to stay out and see if he could get the jump on Ocon for a podium, but Ferrari thought staying out risked giving 4th place to Lewis Hamilton. So I don't actually mind the strategy choice from the team. I can see why they think it's more important to guarantee the points on Mercedes rather than chase a possible podium, considering the constructor standings as it was, but also at the same time I can see why Sainz was quite annoyed. But even that didn't matter as Carlos Sainz got it all wrong later in the race anyway, trying to tiptoe his Ferrari around on slick medium tyres as the rain came down, and it saw him spin off into the runoff area, drop himself down to P8. It was another weekend that seemed to just slip away from the entire Ferrari team. Leclerc in particular has had, one good race weekend from 6 this year? Like, the Italians just need a couple of race weekends in a row to go their way, but that never seems to happen at Ferrari. My third and final winners from the Monaco Grand Prix weekend though, the much anticipated Mercedes upgrade has finally been thrust upon us, and I think they can come away from the weekend feeling pretty happy. There's still a long way to go, don't get me wrong, and Mercedes always said all weekend that this was only step 1 of a very long process, but Hamilton's positivity and another solid points haul for the team is exactly what they would have been hoping for, especially considering they've been planning this radical redesign since Bahrain.
We need a new plan.
It's difficult to judge the Mercedes upgrades in Monaco because it's a track that just doesn't really suit the fundamentals of the Silver Arrows car, but I think in terms of qualifying pace, Mercedes was still at best 4th fastest this weekend. You could see that both drivers were still tweaking the setup of their cars, even in Q3, which isn't really where you want to be doing that. You don't want to be making changes, but instead extracting everything from a setup that you're fully comfortable with. Hamilton in particular was really frustrated that he couldn't find exactly what he wanted in the cockpit on the Saturday. That meant qualifying saw them starting P5 and P8, and as I've said many times this year with Mercedes though, it was the race where they really came good. Both cars eventually finishing in the top 5 and having a relatively clean race. I say relatively because the happiness from the team may be dulled a little bit by the fact that George Russell's strategy put him on course for a podium had he not made that Mirabeau error. Going deep into an escape road in changeable conditions is understandable. Where he got really lucky was coming back onto the track. He got away with a little touch from Sergio Perez after basically reversing into the Red Bull. It could have ended horribly for both of them. However, both cars continued and George Russell was slapped with a 5-second penalty for unsafely joining the track, which actually had no effect on his final position as he was over 10 seconds ahead of Leclerc in P6 by the end anyway. Overall, I think we can say that this weekend is a great confidence boost for the Mercedes team, but I think the real pressure to perform comes in Spain next weekend. The final touches of this new design will be put in place and their real pace and performance compared to the rest of the top 4 will be watched carefully by everyone involved. When does me putting Lance Stroll in the losers category become bullying? Because I don't dislike any of the drivers on the grid, but Lance Stroll is so frustrating. He has been handed a golden ticket this year. He is in an incredible Aston Martin car that has the ability to fight for points and podiums, and he's just throwing it away. It's actually difficult to keep up with how many mistakes he's made this season, and he's only added to it again this weekend. Qualifying in Miami was frustrating because the team risked only using one set of tyres. Qualifying in Monaco was undone by a missed call up to the weighbridge where he missed the light guiding him into the pit lane, which meant that he wasn't properly set for his final run, which then led to a mistake on his final lap. Like, qualifying P14 when your teammate is less than a 10th off pole position is never a good look. Then moving on to the Sunday, and again, it's not just one error, it's which error should we talk about first. He may as well have been in a bumper car. It was absolutely stupid. On lap 1, he goes for a gap that didn't exist, getting caught between Albon and the right-hand side barrier at the hairpin, losing a little bit of carbon fibre in the process. Then Stroll and Perez banged wheels at the chicane out of the tunnel as they squabbled for position, and then Stroll also collided with the back of Kevin Magnussen and was lucky to be able to continue after that. He would go on to retire later on instead in ridiculous fashion by sliding into the barriers on both sides of the track, breaking his front wing and then using it as a sled to smash into the other wall. He did manage to guide his car off the track, meaning that we didn't have a safety car, but if anything, that might have helped Fernando. It was another absolutely abysmal day for Lance Stroll, basically. Aston Martin are almost operating as a one-car team at this point and could end up losing second in the Constructors' Championship, even with Alonso putting in the performances of his life, getting podium after podium. If Lance Stroll isn't going to help the team outscore Mercedes and Ferrari, surely his seat has to be questioned. Like, where does the line between family and business lie? Let's round out this video then with some honourable mentions from the Monaco Grand Prix. Alonso could have been a winner himself. He was millimetres away from a pole position on the Saturday, which completely changes the Sunday. McLaren's double points could have been a winner, but Ocon on the podium makes those 3 points look quite tiny. Yuki Tsunoda finally finished outside of 10th or 11th place, but was a huge loser when the rain came. Could have been 9th, but had no grip on those intermediate tyres. Haas. Losers. Do I need to say much more? They were both just terrible all weekend long, and Logan Sargent was basically a moving obstacle for the front runners and could have easily been a loser too. The argument of many for keeping Monaco on the calendar is usually history and legacy, but if we had more races like this, I think people would complain a lot less about it being part of the Formula One circus. Like, I would absolutely love to see more races like this. I'd also absolutely love to know your guys' winners and losers in the comments down below. Whilst you're down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you next time.